Hi folks, I wanted to talk to you about a subject that isn't too glamorous, but it's very important if you live out in the country, and that is dealing with a septic system. Now, if you live in town or in the city, obviously you're connected to city water, city sewer. You don't think about it. There are no problems that you have to deal with or concerns. You just pay your bill monthly or quarterly, whatever, and everybody else takes care of the problem. But when you live out in the country, you're self-sufficient in that regard. You most probably have a well with a well pump that brings your water, and you have some kind of in-ground septic system to deal with waste. This can be a great blessing, or it can be a major problem if it's not installed and maintained properly. If you have some issues with the septic system, it can cost, to replace one could be anywhere $15,000 to $20,000 totally, depending where you live and what you have to do. So I just wanted to go over some basics with you now for those of you who may be new to this, or you have an in-ground system, you're not too sure about it. Again, it's not glamorous, but it's something that's absolutely essential to life out in the country. What you're looking at here is the clean-out cap on the top of my septic tank. Now, it's right here in the yard outside of the house, and I'll explain that in a minute. But essentially, there are three different kinds of septic systems that you will see people use out in the country. And that may vary from place to place. These systems are regulated by your state Department of Environmental Protection, and what I'm sharing with you is my own experience. It may be different where you live, so just please keep that in mind. I'm just going by my experience, and it may or may not be relevant. You may have to check into local details for your system. But typically, what you want is a place for the waste to come out of your house and then be either stored or put back into the ground in a way that doesn't pollute. One of the things that people will put in if they have a temporary home, like a cabin or an occasional home, they might have just what they call a holding tank, which is basically just a big tank in the ground, and it has to be pumped out periodically. It just keeps the waste in there so that it doesn't pollute anything. Obviously, that's not a good permanent solution, but the two more permanent solutions are a standard septic system and what they call an elevated sand mound septic system. Now let me explain how both of these work. They're a variation on the same thing. What we had talked about here in some previous videos when we did our bathroom remodel, I explained that the 3-inch trunk line, drain line, comes out into the septic tank. And that's the case here. Underneath where this cap is, there's, I think it's about a 500-gallon concrete tank buried in the ground. The modern requirement nowadays is, I think, 1,000-gallon. This system was put in back in the 70s, and it's still working fine, so it was put in properly, and it's done the job that it's supposed to do. But basically, the waste goes into the tank. From there, the solids get broken down by bacteria, helpful bacteria, which is what you want, and then when the tank fills up with a liquefied sludge or whatever you want to call it, there's an exhaust or a drain, shall we say, line out of the septic tank. That's near the top, of course, so that it can fill up before it starts to drain. And then it runs out of the tank to a drain field, which is buried underground to a certain level, and it has corrugated pipe and crushed stone and a few other things so that it actually can seep back into the ground. Now obviously the solids can't go through that pipe and get into the ground. That's why the septic tank, the first stop here, is where everything needs to get broken down. If you're not putting too many caustic chemicals down your septic system, or not too much wash water, with detergents and so on, there should be a healthy amount of bacteria working the way they're supposed to work to break down the solids. You can enhance that if you're worried that maybe your system is sluggish. They do make a powder type substance with bacteria in it that you can buy in the Walmart has it, other stores have it, and you just dump it down the toilet and flush it down. I forget what that costs, but it's a bit more expensive than doing it the simpler way. And what I tend to do is maybe every few months, I'll just get a cheap quart of plain yogurt, because that's got bacteria in it, you know, the harmful or the helpful bacteria in it, the, what do they call it, probiotics, I don't know. And I'll just flush that down the toilet, and that enhances the bacteria colony at work there to break down the solids like you like. In fact, I was told that by the old timers that around here what they used to do for septic tanks to keep them healthy is maybe every 6 months somebody take a pound of ground hamburger and flush it down the toilet, and that put the bacteria in that they needed. So I would not necessarily say we should do that, but that's something that was tried. So what happens is, as I said, the waste comes into the tank. Now you're also going to get plenty of water in there, because your septic line is also going to be from your sink, from your shower, etc. If you're on a city sewer line, all your water, all your wastewater in your house, from your washer, your from your dishwasher, all that is going to go into the line and out to the sewer system. Sometimes that can overwhelm a septic system, and what I have here is I have a separate setup for my wash water, that it doesn't go into this. It's dealt with another way, so that it doesn't overwhelm the system. That would be, if you're familiar with camping and RV terms, that would be the gray water. What goes into the septic tank is some gray water, like from brushing your teeth or from taking a shower, but also then the black water, from what they call the black water from the toilet. So that goes into here, it gets broken down, and then eventually it carries out to a drain field. Now here, the way this was constructed, my drain field is actually, there's a 3-inch pipe or 4-inch pipe, I can't remember what size, that leaves the septic tank and runs under the yard here all the way out beyond where you see that shed on the right hand side. And out in the meadow there is the drain field. It is a standard system. It's all underground. You don't see it, smell it, know anything about it. But what they do in the drain field is there's one pipe coming in, like I said. It's just gravity fed. There's no pump or anything. Goes into that, and then it gets divided up into a grid pattern of perforated sewer pipe. Now you'll see this stuff in the big box home improvement stores. It looks sort of like the PVC, only it's not as thick. It's a different schedule of PVC made for no pressure and for sewer lines and stuff like that. They'll use the solid stuff to be your drain pipe to get to the drain field, and then they'll use the perforated. It's got holes on one side of the pipe. It's solid on the other side, and so that when the liquid gets out to the drain field, it can ooze out into the ground and naturally be absorbed by the ground. And again, if it's working properly, you don't know it's there. There's no bad smell, there's no pollution, nothing. It just gets absorbed by the ground. In fact, I think it was, was it maybe back in the 80s, there was an author by the name of Irma Bombeck who used to write these folksy kind of books. And one of her titles was "The Grass Always Grows Greener by the Septic Tank." Well, that's a little misnomer. It doesn't grow greener by the septic tank. It grows better by the drain field, because it's getting that natural fertilizer, so to speak. But it's still down a few feet, so it's nothing that's going to interfere with your life in any way. And that's the way it's supposed to work, and it should continue to work that way with no problems. Now, the one requirement that I know that we have here where I live is that your septic drain field has to be at least 100 feet from your water well. Now my water well is behind my back another 40 feet on the other side of the house. So I've got plenty of clearance between where I get my fresh water and where the septic liquid goes into the ground. And besides, the well water that I'm getting is coming up from like 60-80 feet, whereas the septic water is just going into the ground about 2-3 feet below ground level. It's not soaking down into the water table, so to speak, and that's the way they want it to work. That brings me to the other type of variation of a septic system that you may run into. Maybe you already have it, maybe you don't. What they call an elevated sand mound. In the drain field, what you'll see is this hump in the yard, and size may vary. They size the drain field based on how many bedrooms you have in your house, because they estimate, there's some formula they use to estimate about how much about how much, usage would go into the tank with the amount of people. They don't base it on the amount of bathrooms, because you could be one person living in a house with 6 bathrooms and you wouldn't put any more septic out than if you only had 1 bathroom in a tiny house. So that's why they base it that way. They figure number of people. So it gets sized to a certain regulation, and the reason that there's an elevated sand mound is the regulations have gotten stricter about soil types and soil absorption and so on. And if they find that the soil you have where you're going to put your drain field isn't absorbent enough to do the job, you're going to add artificial soil, so to speak, with the sand. You're going to put several tons of sand type material in there so that can help to absorb the waste. And some of them I've even seen, they've got a whole bunch of little PVC pipes sticking up for clean outs, just so in case you'd get a clog out in there that you don't have to dig everything up. But the way that that's done, if you're on the front end of building a home out in the country, one of the things that they will require is for you to do what they call percolation testing. That's so that a sewage enforcement officer or other technician can determine, can the soil handle the septic waste you're intending to put into it. So what they'll do is, it's a 2-step test. The first thing they do is they bring in a backhoe, and they will dig a trench, about a 10-12 foot trench that slopes from 1 step down all the way down to about 12 feet. What will happen is the sewage enforcement officer will actually climb down into the trench, and he'll examine the walls of the trench and look at the soil and see if he can determine where he thinks the water stopped percolating into the ground. When the ground absorbs the water, how far down does it go till it stops going down and then starts moving laterally under the ground. For a standard system, the regulations now, I think, is that line of percolation must be down, it's either 5 or 6 feet, I can't remember. I want to say 60 inches to 72 inches it must be for it to be a standard system. If it's any less than that, you've got to add soil on top of the ground, and that's where the sand comes in. So let's say you've got a 3-foot line, a line that's 3 feet down in the soil. Okay, they're going to tell you your sand mound's going to have to be 3 feet above grade. So that's how they determine. I've seen sand mounds that are barely noticeable, and I've seen others that look like they buried a school bus under. It depends on the quality of the soil. The second part of the testing, after they determine that, and if they can't get at least, I think it's 20 inches or 22 inches before that percolation line in the ground, then you can't have a system there at all, because they think the soil just isn't good enough to do anything. And that's how they base their determination. But the second part of the testing, once you get through that first part, is they'll dig a grid pattern of, I think it's 6 or 8 inch holes going down about 20 inches, and they're about 20 feet apart in a grid pattern, 2, 2, and 2, approximately the same size as your drain field is going to be. And what the sewage enforcement officer will do is he'll fill them with water, and then he'll measure, he'll take measurements to see how much the water seeps into the ground over a certain period of time, and how much it drops in however long that he measures it. I don't remember all the numbers on it. Is considered the percolation rate. So that gets calculated into also how well the soil percolates, absorbs the moisture, absorbs the water, and that gets calculated into the size of the system you have, how big your sand mound is. It's pretty complicated and can get pretty expensive, but that's the requirements that the Department of Environmental Protection has now for this kind of on-lot system. And I think they're trying to make it more strict, because they'd really rather that more and more townships and so on build their own sewer treatment plants and have community sewers rather than people with in-lot systems. So it's just one of those government encroachment kinds of things. But when you're out in the country like this, there's no way practical that there's going to be a sewer line ever come through here. I'm a half a mile back off the main road, so it's not going to happen. So an in-ground system is the only way to go. Now, mine was put in the 70s, and according to the rules, I didn't need a sand mound because the soil was acceptable. Whether it would be today or not, I don't know. But you know what? It works. There's no problem, there's no pollution, there's nothing backing up or anything like that. So obviously it was designed properly. So that's how my system is set up, and you'll have to see what you end up with yours. Like I said, you're going from your septic tank, and then you're going to go to a drain field. And usually the drain field is a bit of a distance, not quite this far, but a bit of a distance from your house, especially if you have a sand mound. You don't want that right next to your house. And again, it has to be 100 feet from your well, and usually you put the well is drilled closer to the house so you don't have as long of a pipe to run in. The pump doesn't have to work as hard. But let me just mention briefly about the septic tanks. In the old days, or the cheaper days, shall I say, they used to just put steel tanks in the ground. Well, guess what the problem with that is? Yep, you got it. After so many years, they rust through, and then they're worthless. My wife had a house at one time, a number of years ago, and when she bought it, we didn't know where the septic tank was. There was no clean out like this. So I talked to some of the local guys in the hardware store, and they said, look, you know, most of the people around here had these metal tanks put in. Find where your main line is leaving the house, figure about 10 feet away and dig a hole in the ground. You'll probably hit a metal lid. And sure enough, that's what happened. Well, it wasn't in very good shape. And we knew that once it started to leak, we'd have pollution, the tank wouldn't work, it'd fill up with water, etc., and then toilets would back up. So we ended up having to bring a septic service in. What they did is they pumped the tank empty, they took out the old metal tank, and they replaced it with a new 1,000-gallon PVC tank. And I guess that's the standard now, like a heavy-duty plastic tank. Like I said, this one I know was concrete, because back in the 70s that was top of the line. PVC wasn't used that much back then. But she had a 1,000-gallon PVC tank put in. Line came in from the house, and then they just connected up to the pipe from the drain field. So that worked for her with that upgrade. So if you don't see a clean out like this anywhere on your property, you've got to try to figure out where your tank is, what it's doing. Is it an old cesspool type thing where there's no drain field? It's just basically a hole with rocks lining it, and it just oozes out into the ground there. I've seen things like that. Just one other brief thing that I want to mention about septic systems like this. You do have to be very careful in what you flush down the toilet with an in-ground system like this. Now what I mean is, you don't want to flush things that aren't going to break down fairly easily. You know, you don't want to accidentally flush a washcloth down the toilet, say. You don't want some kid to flush down a pair of underwear. Some of the baby wipes don't break down like toilet tissue does. You don't want to flush any of that down, because what happens is those things just float around in the septic tank here. They don't break down, and what can happen is when the tank fills up, if they get pushed out the exit pipe, they could clog it up or clog up part of your system. That's when it gets real expensive, because there's no way anybody's going to know where that clog is. They may have to dig as many feet as it takes, or as much of your pipe up with a backhoe and all that, and replace all of it just because somebody flushed something down a toilet they shouldn't have. Like I said, anything that breaks down normally, that's okay, but you don't want anything that's not going to break down like that, like fabrics and so on, or stuff like that. Again, in a city sewer line with a sewer plant, that's not as big of a problem, because they actually have what they call grinder pumps as part of the system, and any solids that actually get caught in there, things that don't belong in the sewer line, it'll actually grind up to pieces, and then it gets put out into the beds, and gets taken care of that way. But you don't have that luxury here, so that's one thing to just be careful of. If you have kids out in the country, train them from little on up. No, the only thing that goes down the toilet is what's supposed to go in the toilet, and you don't throw anything down the sink or whatever, because you just don't want a problem like that. Like I said, it could be thousands of dollars in repairs for that, and it's a miserable thing. It'll stink up the place till they dig everything up. So you want to avoid that on the front end if possible. So At any rate, I think I've covered the basics here. I hope this has been informational for anybody who's new to this or planning to build out in the country. This is what's worked for me. I don't know how many more years this system will work. Hopefully it'll outlive me and continue to work. It should, as long as the bacteria is working, doing its job, breaking down the solids, and only liquid goes out into the system. It should be absolutely fine. So we'll see what happens, of course, but that's the way it's supposed to work. And yes, you're paying a lot of money to put a septic system in when you first build a house, or if you have to upgrade one. But keep in mind, then you have no more bills. You don't have to have sewer and water bills. You don't have to have other regular fees that you have to pay, like when you're hooked up to a system in the city. You're paying up front, and then the rest of your life, basically, you have a little electricity to run the well pump. Other than that, you got free water and you have free waste removal after that. So that's the advantage. All right, thank you for listening and watching. I hope this was helpful. Please subscribe to our channel.